there's a part of me that's very wistful about some of the things that woke culture has eliminated from the landscape. And one of them is language play between different cultures. And I know we've spent lots of time at field stations with people from all over the world. We've traveled to many different places, that there's a certain joy in playing with accents, right? It is especially fun to try to let other people, if somebody speaks Spanish as their native language and they've learned English, trying to do a Spanish accent so they can hear what the accent sounds like.
Trying to do a Spanish accent in English.
Right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right. It's great. And, and you might think, oh, that's really insensitive. No, I love it when people do this to us too. And this is a kind of thing that people who have played across languages, everybody loves it. And anybody who can do it really well is the life of the party, right? It's, it's an important thing. And I'm reminded of this, routine.
And it's the kind of humor in which there is recognition. It's not denigrating. It's not exclusionary. It's not tribal, except in that it recognizes that, yes, those of us who speak different languages do in that one way, at least, belong to different tribes. But if we're trying to reach across those tribes, if we're trying to just recognize, hey, we're different and it's cool and we want to communicate, here's how you sound to me. How do I sound to you?
Right. And, I remember jokes about particular errors that people from particular language groups would tend to make in your language that basically create inadvertent puns and things. And the point is
unintentional jokes? Or
No. The jokes are a retelling that is based on a predictable failure of somebody from a language group. And, the point is, it's just too sensitive. You couldn't do such a thing now, but it was never disrespectful, right? We all know that we do this in the other's language, right? That's just the way it is. And so hearing this is just, it enriches you. You are able to put yourself in the mind of somebody else. Hearing the way you speak, it probably increases the acuity with which you speak in another language.
Yeah.
I know I spend a lot of time sort of goofing off, speaking English with accents from around the world, just based on what I've heard,
Yep.
And I don't find anything wrong with it. I know there's no disrespect in it, but I'm reminded of this musical comedy routine, this Italian comedian. What was his name? It's Andriano Celentano. And the song, the video is very dated. And as far as I know, there's not a really good version of it. The video is actually degraded because I think it was recorded on videotape and there's no master that has reemerged. But anyway,
are we gonna link to this?
Yeah, we could. Okay. The song is called Prisen Colon and Sensuzo. Right?
Not helpful.
No. Okay. Here, I have the spelling there. Anyway, the point of the song was it was a kind of elaborate musical song with a kind of fanciful rock star character, this Italian comedian, sort of a slick guy singing what appears to be a song in English, except there are no English words in it. It's what English sounds like to Italians.
It's like it's full of English phonemes, but it's not full of English words.
Right.
And so for Italians who don't speak English or speak it a little bit, it's what it sounds like. It's what an English pop song would sound like.
Right. And it is very catchy, right? And it appears to be full of meaning, right? It starts out with him lecturing to a class full of attractive young women, and he's the cool, handsome teacher or something like this. And then he breaks into a song and dance routine. And
one does.
Right. It's as one does, sure. But anyway, the point is there was nothing disrespectful about this. Quite the opposite. It was Italians telling, English speakers who had taken over the world of pop music what their music sounded like to them. Which,
this is what we hear. And it's not, we're saying, how dare you, or this is gross, or we don't like this. Like, this is just what we hear.
No, and it's awesome.
It occurs to me that hearing you talk here, that one of the many reasons that I love being in places where I don't speak the language, and I always try to speak enough to be respectful and to get along. And you and I have talked about this on air and in life for decades now. I really wish that I had more facility with other languages, but my Spanish is enough to get along with at this point. My French is enough to get, and my Malagasy not really. And when we were in Turkey, we learned a few words enough to be informed, but that was really it. So being in a place, really any place, even in Latin America, where I do speak enough of the language that I can now recognize the chatter around me enough, at least to know sort of what the context is. But it's it's like this intermediate between, much as the reason that I love to watch cats do what they do, and the reason I love to watch monkeys do what they do, is that it's animal behavior. And I want to understand what organisms are doing without the overlay of their damned explanations.
Right.
Because the explanations, the anthropology of what's going on is very often, now you're in the domain of like deceit and self-deception, which is itself evolutionary, and that's all very interesting. But, just as we have said again and again, turn down the sound on your conversations or on the conversations of others, and you will learn a lot more about what is actually going on, like what people are actually feeling towards one another. And you can do that much more easily without turning down the sound if you're able to listen to people and watch people engage in the language that you are not fluent in or don't speak at all. And so you get to engage with people as people, rather than as cats or as monkeys. And like when you're trying to engage linguistically, I'm like, this sucks. This is really hard for me. I'm trying. But then take a step back and like, okay, this is awesome because I get to interact with people without having to internalize their stories about themselves necessarily, the way that when you're in your home language, it's very hard to say, okay, you know what, I just don't want to hear your stories at the moment. I want to watch what you do.
Yeah, it's absolutely revealing. It's also fascinating to find out, when you do spend time, like we've had guides, for example, who we've, taken for a week into Ankara, for example, where we do have some shared language enough to get by, but not a lot. And it's amazing, how you think that a friendship is based on what you say to each other. And the fact is, that's part of it, but it's not the majority of it. And so you can genuinely really like and respect the character of somebody that you've heard very little from and aren't in a great position to say exactly what they said. You know?
Well, and I mean, I'm just thinking, you do end up with little linguistic shared things that become, like the foundation for your friendship. And so, I'm thinking specifically of, it was probably Angelique, in Ankara, which is in northern Madagascar, the very first time we were there, or maybe it was the second time we were there, in which we, and this happened over and over again in Madagascar, things never come when they're supposed to. Never. And so, you're waiting for a boat and you're stranded and like, okay, is it going to come tomorrow? Angamba Rapitsu is one thing.
What they say.
Angamba Rapitsu, maybe tomorrow. Is it going to come tomorrow? Angamba Rapitsu. And
Angamba Rapitsu, which literally means maybe tomorrow, and figuratively means almost certainly not tomorrow.
Right, and also means, how would I know? Like, how would I know? You're here just like I am. How do I know? And then because, Malagasy was their first language and English was our first language, and we came together in French-ish. Their French was generally much better than ours. They'd say, Angamba peut-être maybe.
Right.
Angamba peut-être maybe. So maybe in, 3 different languages. And I just keep repeating it to us like, okay. And so it became sort of this mantra, even when you're like, oh, are we going to be able to get enough rice for dinner? Angamba peut-être maybe. Yeah. Are we going to find the frogs today? Angamba peut-être maybe.
Yeah, it's a great example because I think Angelique didn't quite understand that would be funny to us. He thought he was just sort of covering it, in all of the languages
in case
that might
we missed
be
the first
necessary.
Two.
And then when we started repeating it because it was funny, it became an inside joke for all of us.
Yeah.
So yeah, these things frequently happen, and they say a lot. And I will just say one more thing. I'm wondering if I have mentioned this before. If I have, you'll tell me and I'll stop. But I used to run an exercise with classes that I would take, especially to Sun Lakes in Washington, where we would spend a week in a place where you can basically hike without the trail system because there's enough stuff up above you that you can figure out where you can dead reckon basically across this wild habitat. And for one day of the week, we would make a rule, and it was sometimes called Silent Day, but it was not Silent Day. The rule was no use of language, no reading, no writing, no speaking a language. But you could do anything else you want. You could whistle, you could make noises, right? And so people went about their normal activities, and they innovated ways of doing things. So a Frisbee game, right, descended into like whistles and hoots and things because you didn't really need all that much language to play Frisbee, right? And, walking on a trail the way you ordinarily warn somebody they're about to, trip on something, these things take on another character. There's certain things you can't suppress. You can suppress your language, but then ouch, or, shit, right? That just,
the Tourette syndrome stuff.
The Tourette syndrome stuff emerges anyway, which tells you actually that is really filed separately, right?
Yeah. Well, and the failures are interesting too. So I didn't do this as often as you did, but we did do it on our 11-week Ecuador study abroad in the Amazon at Shirapuno, deepest in the Amazon we got on that trip, and it was deep. And so we did a no language day then, and I was out hiking alone, and I came upon one of our best students. I'm not going to name him here. I think this may be in the book. I don't remember. I'm not going to name him here because I didn't clear it with him before thinking I would tell the story. And he's on the trail ahead of me, coming the other direction, with his binos up, looking into the canopy, and and he sees me, and from a distance, he's like, "Yeah, okay." I walk quietly up, as you always should when you're in the forest, if you want to see anything, and we don't have any language, and so he's like clearly about to leave, and so we sort of share a little whatever it is. I don't even know how we shared anything.
Meaning of some kind.
And I'm looking, and I'm like, yeah. And he walks on the other way, and I stay there for a while looking at the sloth in the trees that he was clearly looking at. And this part of the Amazon was very interesting. Like in Central America, we have happened upon places with so many sloths. And in the Amazon, they're much rarer. And so there are a lot of students on our trip, who are really excited about sloths. And are like,
they're rarely seen. It's hard to know how rare they actually are.
Yeah. There are a number of places where we've been in Costa Rica and Panama, where you're just guaranteed to see sloths. And it was, I think this may have been one or maybe two sloths that anyone saw on this entire trip. And so I was still in the forest for a couple of hours, and I continued on. I think I came out to lunch, and so we're still not talking. And then come dinner time, we decided to break the language thing for dinner, so that we're all sitting around, eating by candlelight for dinner. And I sat next to him, and I said, "Oh man, thanks for pointing out that sloth. That was awesome." He's like, "What sloth?" "What are you talking about?" Like, well, what were you looking at? And he's a bird guy. He's really into the birds. And I don't remember what bird it was, but he was looking at some bird that I didn't see, because I trained my binos on what looked like the same place he had. And I saw the sloth right away and stopped there. So, I could have also seen the bird, and he could have also seen the sloth, if we had been in a moment when we had decided that we were allowed to speak, but we were honoring this, this totally artificial, like, we're not going to do language now. And oh my God, thank you so much. That's awesome.
I don't think
we saw totally different things.
I don't think you necessarily would have both seen both animals. I mean, obviously that's a possibility.
Well, if we'd had language, we would have known what we were looking for.
Right. But I think one of the likely the particulars matter a lot in this case. Yeah. Right. But one of the likely things to happen in that scenario is that you would have walked up and he would have said sloth. Right.
No, he would have
said bird. He was watching a bird. And you would have trained on the bird, and the sloth would actually have become invisible to you.
This is a possibility. Yep.
And so,
language could have stolen that sloth from me.
Well, that's one way to think of it. What the thing, this is such a high bandwidth mechanism for plugging two brains into each other that the effect is that it's very hard. You don't realize that you're actually looking through somebody's eyes just because they've sort of given you an immediate orientation to what they're looking at, and suddenly that's what you see, and you don't see the other thing.
Borrow my perception for a moment.
Right, which is what it's great for. But the point is, until you turn it off, you don't realize how often that happens, right? You need an experience like the one you're talking about to even be able to calibrate it and say, well, how often, it's a calibrator, like leaving the lock in your car off accidentally and returning and nobody's touched anything, because of course, how often does somebody actually try the door to your car?
Right.
Almost never, presumably.
Right.